It was a crisp morning in early March 2024 when New York City residents woke up to unsettling news. A shocking crime had taken place in the heart of Manhattan. In a quiet, upscale neighborhood near the Upper East Side, a luxury apartment building was the site of an event that would leave the city in shock for weeks to come. At 6:45 a.m., the police received an urgent call reporting an unconscious body found inside one of the top-floor apartments. The caller, an employee from the building's maintenance staff, reported that he had entered the apartment to perform routine checks but had discovered the lifeless body of the apartment's tenant, renowned real estate mogul Ethan Cole, sprawled on the floor of his living room. The discovery, initially thought to be a case of a sudden medical emergency, quickly turned into a full-blown homicide investigation. Ethan Cole, 45, was a well-known figure in New York's real estate world. His name had been synonymous with luxury developments in the city, and he was regarded as one of the most influential figures in the industry. His business dealings had earned him both respect and enemies, and the potential motives for his death seemed as complicated as his career. Upon arriving at the crime scene, detectives noted the obvious signs of foul play. Cole's body showed signs of blunt force trauma, and there were indications of a struggle in the living room. The furniture was overturned, and personal items lay scattered on the floor, which suggested that Cole had tried to defend himself against his attacker. The apartment was luxurious, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park, with expensive artworks hanging on the walls, and state-of-the-art technology embedded throughout the space. Yet, despite the apparent affluence, the investigators noted the absence of any significant valuables. There was no sign of forced entry, and precious items such as jewelry, rare paintings, and high-end electronics remained untouched. The initial assumption was that the crime could have been motivated by a robbery gone wrong. However, as the investigators delved deeper into the case, a much darker and more complicated picture began to emerge. As they examined the apartment further, they discovered something that made them reconsider the theory of a random robbery. A laptop, left open on a desk, with a folder labeled "Final Deal" clearly visible on the screen. The folder contained financial documents that appeared to have been hastily compiled, but they weren't part of any public records. This was the first clue that suggested there may have been something personal or highly confidential about Ethan Cole's recent dealings. Detectives immediately began to question those closest to Cole. His wife, Sarah Cole, had been at a charity event the night before and had returned home late. She seemed devastated by the news of her husband's death, but her alibi was solid, and there was no immediate indication of her involvement. However, there was something about her reaction that gave investigators pause. Sarah appeared more numb than distraught, as if she had expected the news. As the investigation unfolded, the team uncovered several layers of complexity. Ethan Cole had recently been involved in a high-stakes development project that was facing opposition from several powerful figures in both the political and business realms. A closer look at Cole's recent financial records revealed that he had been pushing through some very risky deals, including plans for a new skyscraper in Lower Manhattan that could potentially displace several long-standing businesses. While many of his colleagues had praised his boldness, others in the real estate world had criticized him for his disregard for the impact his projects would have on local communities. The scene at the apartment, the missing valuables, and the disturbing financial documents all hinted that there was more to the story. Could it have been a professional rival who orchestrated the attack, or perhaps someone with a personal vendetta against Cole had finally decided to take matters into their own hands? Detective Laura Finley, who was leading the investigation, felt the weight of the case from the moment she stepped into the apartment. Cole's death wasn't just the murder of a wealthy businessman. It seemed to be the manifestation of a larger issue involving power, greed, and betrayal. The city of New York, which had long been a symbol of ambition and opportunity, now found itself at the center of a criminal mystery that would unravel some of its darkest secrets. As the investigation progressed, more questions began to surface. Who could have wanted Ethan Cole dead? And what was the significance of the cryptic financial documents he had been working on? The answers would take weeks to uncover, and the trail of clues would lead investigators to a network of individuals, both familiar and unknown, who would stop at nothing to protect their own interests. The days following Ethan Cole's murder saw New York City gripped by the unfolding investigation. Detective Laura Finley and her team worked tirelessly, piecing together fragments of Cole's life to understand what led to his violent end. They combed through his personal and professional life, searching for any connection that could explain why someone would target him so ruthlessly. With no sign of forced entry and valuables untouched, the theory of a robbery gone wrong was discarded. What they were dealing with was much more than a simple crime of opportunity. The cryptic folder found on Cole's laptop remained the focal point of the investigation. Within the folder, detectives uncovered a series of confidential documents pertaining to a controversial property development project Cole had been spearheading, the Hudson Towers. It was a massive venture aimed at transforming a stretch of waterfront property into a luxury residential complex with high-end condos, shopping malls, and office spaces. On paper, it was a project that could change the landscape of lower Manhattan and redefine the city's skyline. In reality, however, it was a landmine of political tension and local protests. The development plan had sparked outrage among local residents, particularly the small business owners and working-class families who would be displaced by the project. City council members were under intense pressure to either approve or reject the plan, and the matter had become a political battleground. Cole had been relentless in his push to move the project forward. Despite protests and public outcry, his confidence in the project had made him a polarizing figure. Some admired his ambition, while others saw him as a ruthless businessman with no regard for the community's well-being. The Hudson Towers project had been delayed several times, but Cole's latest documents indicated that a breakthrough had been made. The final deal had been struck with a controversial group of investors, some of whom had questionable reputations. There were mentions of payments to third-party consultants, which appeared to be little more than euphemisms for bribes or kickbacks. These shady dealings pointed to the possibility that Cole had been using underhanded tactics to secure his project, making powerful enemies in the process. One of those enemies was likely to have been involved in his murder. Detective Finley's team expanded its focus to include people with potential connections to the Hudson Towers project. They first interviewed Cole's business partners, but none of them seemed to know anything useful. One partner, Raymond Griggs, a veteran developer who had worked with Cole for over a decade, appeared particularly anxious during his interview. Griggs had been a staunch ally of Cole's for years, but now, in light of the murder, his relationship with Cole seemed strained. Investigators learned that the two had been in a heated dispute over the direction of the Hudson Towers project just days before Cole's death. According to Griggs, Cole had been aggressively pushing for faster progress on the project, alienating some of their business partners and local officials. Griggs claimed that Cole had also become increasingly secretive about his dealings with outside investors, particularly a group of powerful figures from abroad whose names had never appeared in any official project records. Griggs' nervousness raised suspicions. Was he merely worried about his future in the business, or was he hiding something more sinister? The detectives turned their attention to one of Cole's high-ranking employees, Jessica Hall, who had worked as his assistant for several years. Jessica had been with Cole during the most turbulent period of his career, and while she seemed loyal to him, there were whispers that her professional relationship with Cole had been far more complicated. Interviews with former colleagues revealed that Cole had a reputation for being difficult to work with and had a knack for using personal leverage against people to get his way. Jessica had reportedly been seen arguing with Cole on several occasions, particularly over some of the decisions he was making regarding the Hudson Towers project. One source close to the investigation revealed that Jessica had recently asked for a significant raise in her salary, claiming that her responsibilities had grown as Cole's project grew more complex. However, her request had been denied, leading to tension between the two. She was also rumored to have had a romantic relationship with Cole at one point, but the affair had ended badly. Could she have been seeking revenge? As the detectives dug deeper, they also began to look into Cole's personal life. They learned that he had been married to Sarah Cole for over 15 years, and while the couple seemed to present a perfect image to the outside world, there were signs that things had become increasingly strained. Sarah had spent much of the previous year living in their second home in the Hamptons, while Ethan remained in Manhattan, absorbed by his business dealings. The police continued to question Sarah, but she remained cooperative and, for the most part, maintained her composure. She revealed that Ethan had been under tremendous pressure due to the controversies surrounding his latest project, but she was unaware of any threats he might have received. Sarah also denied having any knowledge of the mysterious foreign investors linked to the Hudson Towers deal, though she acknowledged that her husband had been more secretive than usual in recent months. As the days passed, the investigation into Ethan Cole's murder became even more tangled. Each person close to him seemed to have a reason for wanting him gone, and yet none of the suspects appeared to have clear, direct motives. The deeper the investigators dug, the more questions arose. Had Ethan's own ambition and cutthroat approach to business led him into dangerous territory? Or was there something more personal at play, an act of revenge or betrayal that had been simmering beneath the surface? Detective Finley felt the weight of the case bearing down on her. With every interview and piece of evidence uncovered, the puzzle became more complex. One thing was certain. Someone close to Ethan Cole had orchestrated his murder, and the trail of corruption, power struggles, and hidden secrets would eventually expose the killer. As the investigation into Ethan Cole's murder intensified, Detective Laura Finley and her team began to realize that they were no longer simply investigating a single crime. They were uncovering a complex web of corruption, deception, and betrayal that extended far beyond the confines of Cole's life. Every lead seemed to open up more questions, and with each passing day, it became clearer that Ethan's death was no random act of violence. It was the tragic culmination of years of ruthless ambition in the dark side of New York's real estate world. The most pivotal breakthrough came when detectives turned their attention to the foreign investors that had recently become involved in the Hudson Towers project. The documents discovered on Cole's laptop contained several references to a consortium of wealthy, international businessmen who were backing the venture, but their identities remained obscured, hidden behind shell companies and offshore accounts. It was clear that these investors were highly influential figures with substantial financial and political power, making them difficult to trace. However, through a painstaking process of financial forensics, investigators managed to uncover one name that kept recurring in the records: Ivan Markov, a notorious real estate mogul from Eastern Europe with a reputation for using extreme measures to ensure his business interests were protected. Markov had a long history of engaging in shady dealings, including bribery, intimidation, and using criminal networks to manipulate markets. His involvement in the Hudson Towers project had been a well-kept secret until now. Detectives found that Markov had been in New York just days before Ethan's murder, meeting with various players in the city's real estate world. One of those individuals was Raymond Griggs, Ethan's business partner, who had been acting nervous and defensive during his initial interview. Further investigation revealed that Griggs had received a large sum of money from an offshore account tied to Markov. The payment appeared to be linked to the final stages of the Hudson Towers deal, suggesting that Griggs might have been involved in some sort of under-the-table arrangement with Markov to move the project forward. This discovery threw a new light on Griggs's behavior, and his alibi started to look increasingly suspicious. Could he have been involved in Ethan's death? Or was he merely a pawn in a much larger conspiracy? Meanwhile, the police also discovered something unsettling about Jessica Hall, Cole's former assistant. They learned that she had been in contact with Ivan Markov in the months leading up to the murder. In fact, Jessica had arranged several meetings between Markov and Cole in private, far from the watchful eyes of the other partners. She had also accessed documents that were restricted to Cole's inner circle, documents that, according to her own admission, were not supposed to leave the office. Investigators dug deeper into her personal history and found that she had a significant amount of debt, some of which appeared to have been erased after she began working closely with Markov's associates. Jessica had recently been seen at one of Markov's properties in the city, leaving with a large envelope that, according to a reliable source, contained cash. She denied any knowledge of her involvement in Markov's business dealings when questioned, but her answers were vague and contradictory. As detectives connected the dots, it became apparent that Jessica had been playing a dangerous game. Her ties to Markov could have given her the motive to take part in a plan to remove Ethan Cole from the equation. She stood to gain financially if Cole's push for Hudson Towers failed, or if a new deal could be brokered under different leadership. As the investigation unfolded, Detective Finley began to suspect that the murder was not merely the result of a personal vendetta or a business dispute gone wrong. It was likely a calculated act to reshape the trajectory of the Hudson Towers project. The real question now was whether the murder was orchestrated by Markov himself, someone working on his behalf, or if it had been the result of internal betrayal within Cole's inner circle. Finley couldn't help but feel that there were still layers to this case that hadn't been fully uncovered. The focus shifted to Ethan Cole's wife, Sarah. Despite her seemingly solid alibi and lack of direct involvement in the real estate dealings, the more investigators learned about Sarah's life, the more they realized that she might not have been as detached from the business as she appeared. In fact, Sarah had been deeply involved in the social side of Cole's empire, attending countless meetings with potential investors, high-profile events, and charity functions that often served as platforms for networking. Some sources indicated that she had even been present at key meetings with the foreign investors, though she had never been officially listed as a part of the decision-making team. The detectives obtained phone records that showed several calls placed by Ethan to an encrypted burner phone, one that had been traced back to a secure location linked to Markov's associates. The timing of the calls matched up with the months leading up to the murder, suggesting that Cole had, in fact, been trying to negotiate with Markov, or at least was attempting to protect himself from escalating threats. This revelation opened up a new line of investigation. Was Ethan's decision to push through with the Hudson Towers project despite mounting opposition a last-ditch attempt to protect himself from Markov's influence? Or had he been trying to buy time, hoping that his connections in the city could provide him with a lifeline? Regardless of the motivations, it was clear that the people who had been closest to Cole knew more than they were letting on. Detective Finley now had a clearer understanding of the power dynamics at play. The murder of Ethan Cole was not just about a single man's ambition or a personal betrayal. It was a symptom of a larger, more dangerous game being played by powerful individuals with the resources to manipulate the system. As the investigation continued, Finley knew that the answers lay somewhere in the tangled relationships between Cole, his business partners, and the shadowy figures pulling the strings behind the scenes. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to come together, but Detective Laura Finley knew that the conclusion to Ethan Cole's murder wouldn't come easily. The more they uncovered, the more layers of corruption, manipulation, and betrayal seemed to unfold, leaving Finley with a growing sense of urgency. Every lead seemed to point to someone in Cole's inner circle, yet each person had a carefully crafted story, making it difficult to pinpoint the real killer. However, there was one truth that could no longer be ignored. Ethan Cole had made powerful enemies, and some of them were far closer to him than anyone had realized. The investigation into the foreign investors, particularly Ivan Markov, had uncovered a tangled web of illicit activity. While it was clear that Markov had been a key player in the complex dealings surrounding the Hudson Towers project, the detectives could not find direct evidence linking him to the murder. Markov's business practices were ruthless, but there was no smoking gun to suggest that he personally orchestrated Cole's death. He remained a shadowy figure lurking in the background, his influence felt, but not visible enough to be directly tied to the crime. As for Raymond Griggs, Ethan's longtime business partner, his financial dealings had raised enough red flags to suggest that he might have been more involved than he let on. Griggs had been caught transferring large sums of money to offshore accounts linked to Markov, and his financial records showed unusual transactions in the days leading up to the murder. However, the investigation failed to uncover any solid proof that Griggs had intended to kill Cole, leaving his true involvement in question. Could he have been complicit in some way? Or had he simply been swept up in the broader chaos surrounding the Hudson Towers project? The most promising lead, however, came from Jessica Hall, Ethan Cole's former assistant. Her interactions with Markov, her unexplained wealth, and her access to privileged information had made her a person of interest throughout the investigation. But it wasn't until the detectives obtained surveillance footage from a nearby building that they uncovered something truly shocking. The footage showed Jessica entering Cole's apartment late on the night of the murder. She had used her key card to access the building, which was allowed only to high-ranking employees and residents. According to the timeline, Jessica arrived just after 10 p.m., when Cole was still alive and left around 11:30 p.m., shortly before the maintenance worker discovered Cole's body. The cameras clearly recorded her leaving with a small bag, which seemed unusually heavy for someone who had only been inside for a brief time. The detectives immediately brought Jessica in for questioning again, This time, they presented the evidence of her visit to Cole's apartment on the night of the murder. At first, she denied any involvement, claiming she had only gone to drop off some documents that Cole had requested. But as the questioning grew more intense, cracks in her story began to appear. Her demeanor shifted, and she became defensive, evasive, and increasingly agitated. It was during this interrogation that Jessica finally broke. She confessed that she had indeed been at the apartment that night, but not just to deliver documents. She had gone to confront Ethan. For months, she had been secretly working with Markov's associates, helping to arrange meetings and funnel information to them. In return, she had been promised financial support to pay off her mounting debts. However, her loyalty had started to waver as Ethan became more difficult to work with, and their once romantic relationship soured. Jessica was no longer willing to be a pawn in the high-stakes game that Cole was playing. The confrontation had been explosive. According to Jessica's confession, she and Ethan had argued fiercely. Ethan had discovered that Jessica had been leaking information to Markov and his associates, and he had threatened to expose her involvement, which would ruin her career. In a fit of rage and desperation, Jessica attacked him. She grabbed a heavy glass sculpture from the living room and struck Ethan in the head with it, killing him instantly. Afterward, in a panic, she staged the scene to make it look like a robbery gone wrong, even going so far as to leave the laptop open with the mysterious folder in an attempt to confuse the investigators. Jessica claimed that she had no intention of killing Ethan when she went to his apartment that night. But when the argument escalated, she snapped. The guilt and fear of getting caught had driven her to cover up her crime, and she hoped that her involvement would remain undiscovered. As Jessica's confession was recorded, Detective Finley felt a mix of emotions. The case that had seemed so complex was now solved, but the resolution came at the cost of exposing a person who had once been so close to the victim. It was a reminder of how power, money, and betrayal could drive individuals to commit unimaginable acts, even against those they once trusted. The aftermath of Ethan Cole's murder rippled throughout the city. The Hudson Towers project, which had been the catalyst for so much turmoil, was put on indefinite hold as the investigation continued to make headlines. The political ramifications were far-reaching, as many of the figures who had backed the project came under scrutiny for their associations with Markov and his criminal networks. Some of the business deals that had seemed so promising in the beginning were now being investigated for possible illegal activities. For Sarah Cole, the widow left behind by her husband's brutal murder, the aftermath was equally complicated. While she had been cleared of any direct involvement, the revelations about Ethan's dealings with Markov and the questionable decisions he had made cast a shadow over her late husband's legacy. Sarah would have to find a way to navigate the fallout from the scandal. But for now, she was left grappling with the loss of a man she had once loved, someone who, in the end, had played a dangerous game that cost him his life. Detective Finley, as she closed the case file on Ethan Cole's murder, couldn't help but reflect on the complexities of the city she served. New York was a place where ambition ran rampant, where dreams were built on skyscrapers and shattered by betrayal. Ethan Cole's death was just one example of how, in the pursuit of power, those who climbed the highest often fell the hardest. The case was officially closed, but the lessons learned from Ethan Cole's life and death would remain with the city for years to come. Power and greed, when left unchecked, could destroy everything. Let's go into the other story. In the neon-lit streets of Las Vegas, where the hum of slot machines and the flashing lights of casinos create an alluring atmosphere, there are darker undercurrents. The bright lights, however, often mask the gritty reality of criminal activities, which sometimes unfold in the heart of the city. Among these cases was one that would shock even the most seasoned officers. It was a high-profile murder that intertwined money, betrayal, and the ever-present underworld of organized crime. It all began on the night of May 12, 2019, when a 40-year-old businessman, Thomas Mitchell, was found dead in his luxury penthouse suite at the Bellagio Hotel. Mitchell was a well-known figure in Las Vegas high-rolling circles. His fortune had been built through real estate, casinos, and a series of shady dealings that had earned him the reputation of being both a philanthropist and a gangster, known for his lavish lifestyle. Mitchell's penthouse was a symbol of his success, overlooking the famed fountains of the Bellagio and filled with priceless art and luxurious furniture. Mitchell had been living a life that many envied, but beneath the surface, there were whispers about his connections to the mafia, particularly the powerful Sorrentino crime family. The family was notorious for controlling several illicit businesses in the area, ranging from illegal gambling operations to drug trafficking. Mitchell's ties to the Sorrentino family were speculated but never confirmed. However, his sudden death would shed light on the sinister web that linked him to organized crime. On that fateful night, Mitchell had been hosting a private party in his suite, inviting high-profile guests from various industries, celebrities, politicians, and business moguls. It was a gathering designed to show off his wealth, power, and connections. As the night wore on, the champagne flowed freely, and the atmosphere grew more celebratory. But things quickly took a darker turn when Mitchell was found lying lifeless on the marble floor of his living room, a single bullet wound to his chest. The news spread like wildfire, and within hours, the Las Vegas Police Department had cordoned off the area. Detectives, forensic teams, and crime scene investigators swarmed the penthouse. The immediate conclusion was that this wasn't a robbery gone wrong or an accidental death. There was no sign of forced entry, and nothing valuable appeared to have been stolen. This was a targeted killing. Detective Emily Dawson, an experienced homicide investigator, was assigned to the case. She had worked several high-profile cases before, but Mitchell's murder stood out due to its connection to the city's criminal elite. Dawson had a sharp instinct for sniffing out lies and following the breadcrumbs of corruption. She knew this wouldn't be an ordinary investigation. Detective Dawson immediately began her work by interviewing the witnesses who had been present at the party. The guest list was extensive, featuring individuals from various sectors of Las Vegas's elite, but a handful of people stood out. There was a noticeable tension among them, with many denying any knowledge of what had happened, and some even offering conflicting accounts of Mitchell's behavior in the hours before his death. One of the most prominent guests was Victor Vince Sorrentino, the son of the notorious head of the Sorrentino crime family. Vince was well known in both legitimate and underground circles for his sharp business acumen and ruthless approach to dealing with adversaries. He had been a close associate of Mitchell for years, and many believed that Mitchell's success in real estate had been due, in part, to Vince's connections. It was also rumored that the two men had shared more than just business dealings. They had a complicated personal relationship that included mutual respect but also underlying animosity, particularly when it came to sharing power and control over certain ventures. Sorrentino appeared calm when questioned by Dawson. He denied any involvement in Mitchell's death and claimed he had left the party early, around midnight, after a heated argument with Mitchell about an upcoming property deal. However, his alibi seemed shaky, and the lack of corroborating evidence made his story hard to believe. Dawson knew that Sorrentino was skilled at manipulating situations to his advantage, and she couldn't rule out the possibility that he was hiding something. Alongside Sorrentino, there was another figure who piqued Dawson's interest, Samantha Hayes, a glamorous and ambitious socialite, who had reportedly been having an affair with Mitchell for several months. Hayes, who was in her late 20s, had been seen frequently in Mitchell's company in the weeks leading up to the murder. She appeared devastated by Mitchell's death, but Dawson noticed something off about her demeanor. Her grief seemed rehearsed, and there were subtle inconsistencies in her account of the events leading up to the night of the murder. According to Hayes, she and Mitchell had shared an intimate dinner just hours before his death. However, she claimed to have left the party just before midnight and was not present when he was shot. What raised suspicion further was Hayes's close ties to several gambling figures with murky reputations, some of whom were believed to have connections with the Sorrentino family. Dawson couldn't shake the feeling that Hayes was either deeply involved in the case or perhaps knew more than she was letting on. She ordered a thorough background check on Hayes, hoping to uncover any potential links to criminal activity. As Dawson dug deeper into the details of Mitchell's life, it became evident that he had been involved in a number of shady dealings in the months leading up to his death. Police records revealed that Mitchell had been the subject of multiple investigations related to money laundering and racketeering. However, he had always managed to evade serious criminal charges, thanks to his connections and his ability to cover his tracks. It seemed clear that Mitchell had been balancing on a fine line between legitimate business and illegal enterprises. Yet despite all of his questionable dealings, Dawson couldn't help but wonder why anyone would kill Mitchell now. He was far from universally loved, but there were no clear signs that he was about to face a betrayal that would lead to his murder. Something deeper was at play, something involving both old grudges and fresh conflicts. Dawson's gut told her that Mitchell's murder was not just about money or power, it was personal. And as she continued to gather evidence, she began to see how complicated and entangled the case had become. Page 3. As the investigation continued, Dawson shifted her focus to the relationships Mitchell had fostered with key players in the city's criminal underworld. While it was clear that the Sorrentino family had been involved in some of Mitchell's business ventures, another name started to surface: Antonio "Tony" Ricci, a lesser-known but still influential figure within the Las Vegas Mafia. Ricci was rumored to have been in direct competition with Mitchell in certain illegal operations, especially concerning illicit gambling rackets. Ricci, unlike Sorrentino, was known for his brutal methods and lack of patience when it came to business disputes. The rumors of a violent fallout between the two men had been circulating for months. It appeared that Mitchell had become too ambitious, pushing into territories that Ricci had long controlled. The tension between them had escalated over time, culminating in an altercation at a high-stakes poker game at one of Mitchell's private casinos just weeks before his death. Witnesses to the game described the fight as heated, with Mitchell threatening to expose Ricci's illegal dealings if he didn't back off from certain areas. Many believed that Ricci had been growing desperate and would not hesitate to take drastic measures if it meant maintaining control. Dawson tracked down several people who had attended the poker game, hoping to gather more information about the confrontation. Most of them were tight-lipped, aware of the consequences of crossing Ricci or talking about matters involving Mitchell's dealings. However, one of Mitchell's employees, a man named Greg Miller, had witnessed the argument and was willing to speak to Dawson. Miller, a mid-level manager at one of Mitchell's casinos, had been close to his boss and was one of the few who wasn't intimidated by the Mafia's presence. According to Miller, the tension between Mitchell and Ricci had been palpable during the poker game. Mitchell was bold, almost to the point of arrogance, Miller recalled. He didn't care who he pissed off. He thought his money and power could protect him from anyone, even people like Ricci. Miller went on to describe how Mitchell had refused to back down during the argument, insisting that Ricci couldn't stop his plans to expand his gambling empire. This conversation with Miller gave Dawson more insight into Mitchell's state of mind before his death. It also painted a clearer picture of the dangerous path Mitchell had chosen, as well as the growing animosity with Ricci. The possibility that Ricci had ordered the hit seemed more likely, but Dawson also knew that in a case like this, appearances could be deceiving. Could someone else have been pulling the strings, using Ricci's reputation as a smokescreen? The investigation into Mitchell's murder had grown more convoluted by the day, and Dawson was starting to question whether the truth was as simple as it appeared. As Dawson continued to dig into Ricci's background, she uncovered a disturbing link. Ricci had recently been involved in a money laundering scheme that stretched across several casinos in Las Vegas. He had allegedly been using Mitchell's properties as a front to clean dirty money from illegal gambling operations. Mitchell had apparently been unaware of the extent of Ricci's involvement, but when Dawson reviewed the financial records of Mitchell's casinos, it became clear that there had been irregularities in the accounts, suspicious transactions that hinted at money being funneled through the casinos. This revelation made Dawson even more convinced that Ricci had a strong motive for eliminating Mitchell. If Mitchell had discovered the money laundering scheme or threatened to expose it, Ricci would have seen him as a liability that needed to be silenced. However, there was still one major unanswered question. Why would Ricci go to the trouble of orchestrating a murder when a simple bribe or threat would have sufficed? Dawson's instincts told her there was more to the story, and she began to suspect that someone else had been involved in the planning of the murder. Someone with access to both Mitchell and Ricci's operations. As the case deepened, Detective Dawson's suspicion about the involvement of others grew stronger. She was beginning to piece together the puzzle, and the pieces were starting to align in a way that suggested the murder of Thomas Mitchell was not just the work of a single mastermind. It was the result of a complex web of alliances, betrayals, and power struggles. In one of the most crucial breakthroughs of the investigation, Dawson received a tip from an anonymous source. who claimed to have overheard a conversation between two men at a local diner. The men, according to the informant, were discussing a plan to eliminate Mitchell. They had referenced a falling out and how Mitchell had been causing too much noise in their business dealings. The source didn't know the names of the men, but the description of the voices led Dawson to suspect that one of them was a high-ranking associate of Ricci, a man named Carlos Chuck DeMarco, who had been involved in managing Ricci's illegal operations. Dawson immediately initiated surveillance on DeMarco, hoping to catch him in a moment of weakness or find a lead that could confirm his involvement in the murder. The surveillance revealed that DeMarco had been in close contact with Samantha Hayes in the weeks leading up to Mitchell's death. This connection caught Dawson off guard. Hayes had been someone she had initially believed to be a mere bystander in the case, a woman scorned by a cheating lover. But the more Dawson delved into Hayes' background, the clearer it became that she was far from innocent. Hayes, it turned out, had been deeply involved in Mitchell's illegal activities. She had known about the money laundering operation through Mitchell's casinos and had even helped facilitate some of the transactions. But what was even more surprising was that she had also been secretly working with Ricci and DeMarco to undermine Mitchell's power. Hayes had used her affair with Mitchell to gain his trust and access to sensitive information, all the while feeding details to Ricci's crew. The affair had been a convenient cover, one that allowed her to manipulate both Mitchell and Ricci for her own benefit. Dawson's breakthrough came when she uncovered a series of encrypted messages between Hayes and DeMarco, where they discussed the possibility of taking over Mitchell's empire. It appeared that the two had been in talks for months about eliminating Mitchell, not only for personal revenge, but also to take control of the illegal operations that Mitchell had established. The plan to murder him had been carefully orchestrated, with Hayes acting as an inside informant, feeding information about Mitchell's movements and vulnerabilities to Ricci and his crew. DeMarco had been tasked with overseeing the logistics of the murder, while Hayes ensured that Mitchell remained unaware of the impending danger. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Dawson learned that Hayes had been the last person to speak to Mitchell before his death. While many guests had left the party, Hayes had stayed behind for a private conversation with Mitchell. The security footage from the Bellagio, which had initially been dismissed as inconclusive, was reviewed once again, and this time, Dawson noticed something crucial. Just before midnight, Hayes was seen leaving the penthouse in a hurry, her face tense as though she knew the deed had been done. In the following days, Hayes was arrested for her role in the conspiracy to murder Thomas Mitchell. She was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and several counts of money laundering. DeMarco and Ricci were also arrested, with evidence linking them to the planning and execution of the crime. The investigation had unraveled the true scope of Mitchell's criminal empire, exposing the tangled relationships of greed, betrayal, and ambition that had ultimately led to his death. The trial that followed was one of the most high-profile in Las Vegas history. It revealed the extent to which people would go to gain power and control in a city that thrived on excess and corruption. Hayes, in her testimony, admitted to her involvement in the plot, but claimed she had been manipulated by Ricci and DeMarco. However, the jury found her guilty of all charges, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Ricci and DeMarco received similar sentences, their criminal careers brought to a dramatic and violent end. While justice had been served, Dawson couldn't shake the feeling that Las Vegas had once again proven its reputation as a city where loyalty was fleeting, and betrayal was just another part of the game. The murder of Thomas Mitchell may have been solved, but the shadows of corruption still loomed, large over the neon-lit streets of the city. For Dawson, it was a stark reminder that in Las Vegas, nothing was ever as it seemed, and the line between the criminal world and the glittering facade of the Strip was often razor-thin. Let's go into the other story. In 2019, Chicago became the center of an intense and controversial criminal case involving actor Jussie Smollett. The case garnered widespread media attention and sparked debates over race, identity, and the trustworthiness of public figures. Smollett, best known for his role on the TV show Empire, was accused of staging a hate crime against himself, which led to a complex investigation involving both law enforcement and the public. On the night of January 29, 2019, Jussie Smollett reported to the Chicago Police Department that he had been the victim of a violent assault. Smollett claimed that two men, who were allegedly motivated by racist and homophobic hatred, attacked him in the streets of downtown Chicago in the early hours of the morning. He stated that the men yelled racist and homophobic slurs, poured bleach on him, and placed a noose around his neck. According to Smollett, the attackers also referenced then-President Donald Trump during the assault, which fueled further outrage and condemnation across the country. Smollett's story quickly gained attention, with many public figures and organizations condemning the attackers' alleged actions. He was widely supported by the LGBTQ+ and African American communities, who saw the incident as a manifestation of the growing intolerance and hate in America. Celebrities, politicians, and civil rights activists voiced their solidarity with Smollett, and his story was initially treated as a genuine hate crime. However, questions about the validity of Smollett's account began to arise. Shortly after the initial report, investigators began to uncover inconsistencies in Smollett's story. These discrepancies would eventually lead to a dramatic turn of events in the case. As the investigation progressed, detectives started to focus on the evidence that didn't quite match the narrative Smollett had provided. Security footage from nearby surveillance cameras revealed that Smollett had been seen on the streets just before the alleged assault, but there were no signs of the brutal attack he had described. Moreover, investigators found that Smollett's phone records, which he initially claimed would confirm his version of events, showed no evidence of communication with the alleged attackers. A breakthrough came when two Nigerian-American brothers, Olabinjo and Abimbola Osundairo, were identified as persons of interest. The brothers had previously worked as extras on Empire and had a history with Smollett. Initially, they had been presented as the attackers, but as the investigation continued, it became clear that Smollett had a far more significant role in the incident than originally reported. The Osundairo brothers eventually cooperated with the police and revealed that Smollett had hired them to stage the attack. According to their testimony, Smollett had orchestrated the entire incident in an attempt to gain publicity and further his career. He allegedly paid the brothers $3,500 to help him carry out the hoax, and even provided them with specific instructions on how to stage the attack, including using a noose and bleach. The brothers also stated that Smollett had rehearsed the assault with them before it took place. This revelation shocked the public and dramatically shifted the focus of the case. Smollett, once the victim, was now the prime suspect in what was being called a hoax hate crime. The situation was made even more complicated by the fact that Smollett had previously been an advocate for racial and LGBTQ+ justice, which led many to question his motivations. As the investigation into Jussie Smollett's actions unfolded, it became clear that the case was not only a criminal matter, but also a significant public relations disaster. Smollett was charged with multiple felony counts, including disorderly conduct for filing a false police report. On February 21, 2019, Smollett was arrested by Chicago police and later released on bond. The arrest marked a dramatic shift in the narrative, with the actor now facing legal consequences for his role in staging the hate crime. In March 2019, Smollett pleaded not guilty to all charges. His legal team maintained that he was innocent, claiming that he was the victim of a targeted attack and that the police were overreaching in their investigation. However, public opinion had already begun to shift. Many people, including some who had initially supported Smollett, now saw him as a perpetrator who had fabricated a story that undermined real instances of hate crimes. The case became a political flashpoint, with many using Smollett's actions as an example of how public figures could exploit social justice issues for personal gain. Some believed Smollett's hoax had done significant damage to the cause of fighting hate crimes and had made it harder for real victims to be taken seriously. Others saw it as part of a broader trend of media sensationalism, where stories were amplified without thorough investigation. The media played a pivotal role in the case, with Smollett's initial account receiving widespread coverage before the truth emerged. The story of the supposed hate crime spread rapidly across news outlets, social media, and celebrity circles, adding fuel to the political and cultural debates about race, identity, and victimhood. Once Smollett's deception came to light, the media landscape shifted, with many outlets revisiting their initial coverage and offering critical commentary on the role of the press in amplifying such stories. The Chicago Police Department and the city's mayor, Lori Lightfoot, were particularly vocal in expressing their anger and frustration with Smollett's actions. Mayor Lightfoot condemned the hoax as an affront to the real victims of hate crimes and questioned the resources spent on investigating the false report. Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson also criticized Smollett for tarnishing the city's reputation, as the investigation had been both costly and time-consuming. The Jussie Smollett case left a lasting mark on American culture and the legal system, raising important questions about the nature of truth, social media influence, and the power of celebrity in shaping public opinion. The case also shed light on the complexities of hate crimes and the potential dangers of fabricating such incidents. In the years following the case, discussions about the consequences of Smollett's actions continued to resonate in conversations about social justice and identity politics. Many viewed his hoax as a cautionary tale about the risks of exploiting genuine societal issues for personal gain. The case also highlighted the importance of critical thinking and careful investigation in a media landscape that often rushes to sensationalize stories without fully understanding the facts. Ultimately, the Jussie Smollett case stands as a high-profile example of how one individual's actions can affect larger societal conversations about race, justice, and the pursuit of truth. The lessons learned from the incident continue to influence discussions about accountability, media ethics, and the role of public figures in shaping public opinion. The Jussie Smollett case had a profound cultural impact, sparking discussions on a wide range of issues beyond just the specifics of the incident itself. As the case unfolded, it prompted deeper reflection on topics such as the ethics of media coverage, the role of public figures in advocating for social change, and the potential dangers of hoaxes in the context of hate crimes. One of the key debates that emerged from the Smollett incident was the challenge of navigating the fine line between skepticism and support for marginalized communities. Many people within the African American and LGBTQ+ communities were initially supportive of Smollett, seeing his reported attack as part of a larger pattern of violence and discrimination that was pervasive in American society. When it was revealed that the attack was staged, it led to feelings of betrayal and anger among some members of these communities, who felt that Smollett had undermined the real struggles they face. On the other hand, critics of Smollett argued that the hoax undermined the credibility of victims of real hate crimes and gave ammunition to those who sought to downplay the existence of systemic discrimination. Some people viewed the Smollett case as an example of victimhood culture, a term used to describe individuals who are seen as exploiting claims of victimization for personal gain. The case led to heated discussions about the motivations of those who publicly advocate for social justice and whether there is an inherent danger in blindly trusting individuals based on their public personas. The role of social media in the case also cannot be overlooked. The speed at which Smollett's initial claims spread online demonstrated the power of digital platforms in shaping public narratives. Once the allegations were made, social media users and influencers took sides, amplifying the story with hashtags and viral posts. The backlash against Smollett was equally swift when the truth began to surface. This instant, widespread dissemination of information, often without proper fact-checking, showed how social media can both magnify and distort real-world events. In the wake of the scandal, Smollett's case also became a point of political division. Those who were already critical of the political left and its advocacy for racial and LGBTQ+ justice used Smollett's actions as an example of the left's tendency to amplify exaggerated or false claims of injustice. Conversely, those who were sympathetic to social justice causes felt the incident was being used to discredit movements that aim to bring attention to systemic racism and homophobia. Beyond the legal and media debates, the Jussie Smollett case sparked a broader cultural conversation about race, identity, and the way America addresses issues of hate. For many, the case highlighted the tension between genuine movements for justice and the potential for individuals to exploit or distort these causes for personal or political gain. Smollett's actions also raised questions about how society identifies and responds to hate crimes. The case illustrated how the portrayal of hate crimes, especially when staged, can shape public perceptions of race relations and impact the strategies employed by activists and lawmakers in addressing hate and discrimination. Some advocates worried that Smollett's hoax would be used as justification to dismiss calls for more attention to be given to real incidents of racial and homophobic violence. In addition, the case drew attention to the ways in which the media and public figures influence discourse about victimhood. By fabricating his experience, Smollett complicated the understanding of what it means to be a victim of hate. It highlighted the need for caution in responding to high-profile cases and emphasized the importance of verifying facts before jumping to conclusions in matters of social justice. For some observers, Smollett's actions were seen as emblematic of broader societal challenges, the increasing polarization of issues surrounding race, the public's growing distrust in institutions, and the complex ways in which personal identity intersects with political and social movements. The aftermath of the Smollett case continues to resonate as a symbol of both the dangers of exploiting social justice causes for personal gain and the importance of honest, transparent advocacy for marginalized communities. The incident also left its mark on how future incidents of hate crimes would be investigated and perceived. Law enforcement agencies may now face more scrutiny when responding to allegations of hate crimes, and some believe the Smollett case could make it more difficult for victims of genuine hate crimes to be believed. On the other hand, some argue that it is crucial to maintain vigilance and skepticism to ensure that no one, regardless of their public status, can manipulate such grave situations for personal gain. In conclusion, the Jussie Smollett case remains a highly contentious and multifaceted issue, one that continues to shape public discourse about race, identity, justice, and the power of the media. As society grapples with the complex nature of this case, it serves as a reminder of the importance of truth, integrity, and accountability in both public life and legal proceedings. The legacy of the Smollett case is likely to be debated for years to come, as it provides valuable lessons on how we navigate the intersection of race, media, and justice in an increasingly complex world. The last other story. The case of the Aurora Theater shooting. On the night of July 20, 2012, Aurora, Colorado, became the site of one of the most horrific mass shootings in American history. The shooter, James Egan Holmes, opened fire in a crowded movie theater during a midnight screening of The Dark Knight Rises, the highly anticipated Batman film. The tragic event left 12 people dead and 70 others injured, with many more forever scarred by the terror they experienced that night. James Holmes, a 24-year-old former neuroscience graduate student at the University of Colorado, had been planning the attack for months. He meticulously prepared for the shooting by purchasing weapons, ammunition, and bomb-making materials. Holmes had been showing signs of mental instability in the months leading up to the shooting, with reports of his increasingly erratic behavior. But no one could predict the severity of his actions. Holmes arrived at the Century 16 movie theater in Aurora, dressed in tactical gear, including a gas mask and bulletproof vest. He entered through a side exit door, which he had propped open with a backpack. At approximately 12:39 a.m., during a particularly intense scene of the movie, Holmes threw tear gas into the theater and began shooting. He fired into the audience indiscriminately, spraying bullets into the crowd with an assault rifle, a shotgun, and a handgun. Panic quickly set in as moviegoers tried to flee the theater. But the exits were either blocked or people were too overwhelmed with fear to escape. Those who could not flee were trapped in the chaos, with many victims falling to the ground as they were hit by gunfire. Some brave individuals attempted to shield others or help them to safety, risking their own lives to try and save others. Holmes's attack lasted only a few minutes, but the consequences would echo for years. After the shooting, he calmly walked out of the theater and made his way to his car, where he waited for the police to arrive. He didn't attempt to flee or resist arrest. When the police arrived, Holmes immediately surrendered without incident. He was arrested without any further violence. In the aftermath of the shooting, it was revealed that Holmes had been planning his attack for months. He had purchased the firearms legally, and he had been collecting a significant amount of ammunition and explosives. Holmes also booby-trapped his apartment, leaving behind a complex array of homemade bombs that could have caused even more destruction. Fortunately, law enforcement officials managed to safely defuse the devices before they could go off. Holmes's motives for the attack were initially unclear. He had no known personal connection to any of the victims, and he did not appear to have any particular vendetta against the movie theater or the film itself. Over time, his behavior and statements began to paint a picture of a deeply disturbed individual. Holmes had been struggling with mental health issues for years, and had been under the care of a psychiatrist at the time of the shooting. He had even been diagnosed with schizophrenia, a severe mental disorder that often includes symptoms like delusions, hallucinations, and disorganized thinking. Holmes's behavior became even more disturbing when it was revealed that he had spent a significant amount of time preparing for the massacre. He had written a letter to his psychiatrist, detailing his plans for the shooting and explaining that he felt he had been driven to violence due to his overwhelming feelings of alienation and anger. Holmes referred to himself as the Joker, a reference to the Batman villain, and claimed that he wanted to create a spectacle that would capture the attention of the world. As the investigation into Holmes's past unfolded, it became clear that he had been struggling with feelings of isolation and rejection for years. He had been an outcast during his childhood and had difficulty making friends throughout his life. In college, he had been known to have trouble fitting in with others, and his social anxiety worsened. He had also been bullied for his appearance and mannerisms, which only seemed to deepen his sense of alienation. Despite these challenges, Holmes had shown no signs of violent behavior prior to the shooting. He had been considered an intelligent and capable student, and there was no indication that he was preparing to carry out a mass murder. His actions that night, however, suggested a complete break from reality, as he meticulously planned every detail of the attack, from the weapons to the bombs to his own appearance. Following his arrest, Holmes was charged with 24 counts of first-degree murder, one for each victim who died, and 140 counts of attempted murder for the wounded. He was also charged with weapons-related offenses and the illegal possession of explosives. The case became a media sensation, with people around the country struggling to understand how such a horrific act could have occurred. There were widespread debates over gun control, mental health issues, and the responsibilities of universities to identify and intervene with students who may be struggling with serious psychological disorders. In 2015, after a lengthy trial, James Holmes was found guilty of 24 counts of first-degree murder and 140 counts of attempted murder. The jury was tasked with deciding whether he should receive the death penalty or life in prison without the possibility of parole. After weeks of deliberation, the jury ultimately recommended that Holmes be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge officially sentenced Holmes to 12 consecutive life terms, one for each of his victims who had died, along with an additional 3,318 years for the attempted murder charges. The Aurora Theater shooting left an indelible mark on the lives of the survivors and the families of the victims. Many of the survivors have had to live with both physical and emotional scars from that night. Some continue to cope with the trauma of the attack through therapy and support groups, while others have worked to raise awareness about gun violence and mental health issues. The tragedy also had a lasting effect on the local community, which rallied together to support those affected by the shooting. The case brought to the forefront important discussions about the challenges of preventing mass shootings and the complex issues surrounding mental health. Many people questioned how such an attack could have been prevented and what more could have been done to identify warning signs in individuals like Holmes. The Aurora Theater shooting is a reminder of the need for ongoing efforts to address mental health care and the prevention of gun violence in America.